Our first speaker is Jan Barnett. She's a Josephite nun and is the Josephite Justice Coordinator. She, like her sisters historically and currently, is right in there where people most need them. For example, she was arrested in Joe Hockey's office, which is quite a triumph. She was in a prayer vigil with others of the Love Makes a Way movement about the plight of children in detention. So she's going to speak on the theme of changing hearts and minds. Thanks, Jen.
Framing the debate to win, if only we could. I think there are many people who are endeavouring to do that in our world today. I suppose the question for me is, if we're thinking about changing minds and changing hearts, what is it that brings that about? How is it that we think and feel the way we do? I grew up in a very strongly Labor household, and yet as an adult, while I voted one way, my brother voted very differently. And I think of John Howard and his brother, and I think of Peter and Tim Costello. And I wonder, what is it we really need to do to change our minds and to change our hearts? I saw a notice on the back of a car recently in Sydney, and it said, "Is it the truth, or did you read it in the Telegraph?" I thought we could translate that to, "Is it the truth, or did you read it in the Mercury? Is it the truth, or did you hear it from Alan Jones? Is it the truth, or did you hear it from Ray Hadley?" They're really big questions for us, I think. And I believe they say something and help to explain something about the attitude of Australians today. And I said at the beginning when I was in conversation before this, you know, in a sense tonight, I feel as if we are speaking to the converted. It's a wonderful sign of optimism and hope to me that so many people are here for this occasion. But in December 2013, 60% of Australians felt that the government should increase the severity of its treatment of asylum seekers. 60%. One of the things that we know is that the most important and consistent predictor of prejudice is the acceptance of inaccurate information or myths, or what is proposed to us as truth from some of those sources I just mentioned as true. It's a big question for us, I think, and how we start to frame the debate in order to change the policies is a huge question for me. I'd like tonight to speak and use 3 images as the basis for my talk. I'd like to look first of all at the world context of what we are on about. I'd like to talk about Australia for some strange reason, and I would like then to finish off with talking about our personal response and the call to each of us to change our minds and change our hearts. In May, I was in Geneva. And this is a beautiful image in the office of the UNHCR. And it's a memorial to humanitarian workers from UNHCR who have been killed in the line of duty. I went to about 20 different meetings during the time I was there, the 2 weeks. And I could not believe it because I was there a number of years ago and people would be confused between Australia and Austria, There were certain misconceptions about who we were and what we were on about. This time, every single person I met knows about Australia. Every single person I met knows about Tony Abbott. Every single person I met, every single person is absolutely horrified by Australia's treatment of asylum seekers and refugees. That happened at every meeting I went to. It happened every time I met someone. Raised very big questions for me. I was there when Tony Abbott proposed that he could help the European leaders, as he did yesterday, to solve their problem of boat people, that he would help them to turn the boats back. I was very delighted that the UN and the UNHCR and the International Catholic Migration Centre issued a joint press release saying that the concern of the UN and the UNHCR was for people first. It was a very moving moment for me, actually. One of the things that occurred to me was that I was really embarrassed and humiliated at the fact that I represented a country that was talking in this fashion about Australia. But at the same time, to be 2 weeks in a place where everybody felt the way I felt, where everybody thought that what we were doing was horrifying, was really affirming. So if you want to be affirmed in your beliefs, if you want to feel as if other people think what you think is reasonable, go to Geneva. One of the things in Geneva is this huge broken chair. Initially, it was established encouraging all countries to sign the Ottawa Treaty about landmines. But I think now it has become a symbol of all those treaties that are broken, and it is an appeal to all of us to take a stand in that area. We know, and I'm sure that Julian will speak more fully about that in Geneva at the United Nations there are very strong beliefs about the dignity and rights of each person. We as Australians have signed the Geneva Convention and the Protocol. We have signed the agreement that says every person in distress has the right to seek asylum. We have signed the document which talks about the rights of the child. As Australians, if you asked people to speak about it, they would acknowledge the fact that all of us together are called to protect this universe, to protect this planet that is ours. And yet what we see about us is so different. We see people in distress. We see people pleading for us to make a difference. We see people drowning, people who believe that drowning from a boat is preferable to dying from torture. We have seen, and I think this is maybe to our benefit, in the last few weeks, people fleeing and being locked out, people being inhibited by barbed wire. We've looked at the refugees particularly from Syria in the last few weeks, who are seeking asylum in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey. Lebanon, of course, has 1 in 4 people at the moment in its cities and in its country who are refugees. 1 in 4. They do not have enough schools for the children. They do not have enough food for the people who are seeking asylum. We hear lots of things from the Australian government about how generous we are. Yes. No, I wrote a letter to the Herald a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't printed in the end, but I had 3 interactions with the letters editor about why I was saying what I was saying and what I was saying. This, of course, is from wordswithmeaning.org, and it's talking about the contribution that different countries are making and processing in terms of asylum claims. And it's quite clear where Australia sits in all of that, even though we proclaim as a country that we are extremely generous. We know that every child in this earth and on this planet has a right to a fulfilled life. One of the things that I think is very interesting, and I only heard this in the last couple of weeks, although I think it's common sense and we're all aware of it, is that the more positive a government is about asylum seekers and refugees, the more tolerant the society is, even though it might be polarised. And so one of the things that has come out is that Germany, because of the leadership in Germany and their welcoming of refugees, is much more positive in terms of its general population than many other countries, even though there's the polarisation occurring and the extreme right wing is speaking out against that. So I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. It raises questions for us as Australians. And so the second image I would like to refer to is an image that speaks to us of our country. Two people, for all of us, I think, who are models of who we are and what we stand for, are Gillian Triggs and Julian, who is speaking to us tonight. I believe that these two people stand for what we are yearning for as Australians. I believe they are able to clarify for us simply and with common sense comments something of the reality that enables us to change our minds and change our hearts. I believe what they stand for is in a sense in contradiction to and challenging of the whole attitude of Team Australia. I think it calls us, and I think they call us, to a new place. Some of the cartoons around refugees and asylum seekers are, I think, very indicative. So we have, let's hear it for stopping the boats. How often have we heard that in the last months and years till we're very sick of it? And in this cartoon, I think it is very clear of what has been the cost of stopping the boats. Not only of stopping the boats, but of actually becoming people smugglers ourselves and turning them back. This one, I think, shows very clearly our attitude to boat people, our great fear that they are going to overtake us, our great fear that unless we take very firm action, we are going to be destroyed. Strikingly at odds, I think, as the New York Times pointed out yesterday, with what we say is our traditional attitude to asylum seekers and refugees. And so what's happened in our country is that we have locked out all persons. So this year, while Germany anticipates that they will be accepting 800,000 boat people, Australia has accepted none, not one. And our whole attitude is that there is a reason for that, because we're full. We can't take you. And also, you're illegal. And also, you're mainly an economic refugee. And also, we have to protect ourselves. And so we have this whole attitude of Fortress Australia. And we have developed a strategy for dealing with asylum seekers. And our procedure is that, yes, we have passed them off onto others. The tragedy, of course, is that the media, much of the media, supports this attitude. And so there are many of the papers, these are mainly from the Telegraph, which I'm not familiar with it actually because I don't read it. But every now and again I do see the headlines. And this is what you see when you are travelling on the train in Sydney, or when you are coming to the airport where they have the telegraph free for me yesterday when I was coming to Tasmania. They had the Australian free for me yesterday when I was coming to Australia. And as somebody said to me recently, well, the Australian is really the telegraph using big words. So, in a sense, as a nation, I think in many different ways we are adrift, because there are 38 million refugees in the world, and many Australians really think that this is not an issue for us, and they remain indifferent. The other issue I think that is critical for us as Australians is that we are being kept in ignorance. We do not know the truth. We are not told the stories. We are told continually that it's an operational matter, that it has nothing to do with us. And so information like this is not shared with the Australian people. If you look at those statistics, even if you can't see the details of it, it is quite clear that community detention will be so much cheaper for us economically and in every other way than offshore detention and onshore detention. And if we could only give people bridging visas, look at what would happen. In Australia too, there are issues that have told us in recent times that what is going on here is seriously wrong. So if you think of the Moss report, if you think of the report on Nauru, if you think of the commission that was set up to investigate these, we realise, don't we, that there is something very seriously wrong with our asylum policy. And as we look at all that, those are the issues that face us as a nation. What about the issues that face us as individuals? Like when I'm faced with all of that, sometimes I sit down at night and I watch the news and I think I can't watch any more. It's just so overwhelming, and what can I do? And yet I look at the hope that is given to me by so many other people, and even though she's not an Australian, I thought this was a really helpful comment and a hope-filled comment when Angelina Jolie can say, "Refugees have done more for my heart and spirit than I can ever express in words." So if we are going to change minds and change hearts, then we have to interact and build a relationship with asylum seekers and refugees. A young woman that I have been working with for the past 5 years, I used to work with YCW, Young Christian Workers, and Gitani, who's on the left-hand side of that, was the international president of YCW. And during her time as international president, she used to speak at the ILO, the International Labour Organisation in Brussels. She would speak at different labour functions. She would meet with people who are interested in justice. And so she was involved on a whole lot of different levels. When she finished her term of leadership, she really wanted to come to Australia, but of course, Sri Lankan, what would be the chance? So she went back to Sri Lanka with her husband, her newborn baby, and her 4-year-old daughter. And of course, as soon as she arrived, she was called in for questioning. She was taken in, her family were all called in for questioning. In the end, she escaped, and she's escaped to France, and she has been given asylum in France for the next 10 years. She finds French difficult. I mean, she speaks English quite well, she speaks Sinhalese, she speaks Tamil. And I think here's this woman, this young woman, passionate for justice, particularly for the rights of young women, who cannot do what she believes she could do because we as a nation could not support her. And I know we as a congregation would be very happy to support her coming to Australia and to sponsor them, but what would be the chance? And yet many of us who have started to look at the face of our refugees and to have been touched by them. So we've seen pictures like these. They call us to a new place. They call us to compassion. They call us to reach out. And I believe that this image that I was given when I was in Geneva says something very significant to us. And I'd just like to read it. I'm not a terrorist, I am a developer. I am not a drain on the economy, I am a trained, qualified professional. I am not a queue jumper, I am a loving and protective father. I am not a threat, I am fleeing threat. I am not a stranger, I am a brother, a father, a son. I am not illegal, I'm a seeker of freedom, a right granted to me by Australia and the United Nations. And it's out of that compassion that is reaching out, which is why all of us are here tonight. I think that is leading us as Australians and as individuals to stand up, to speak out and to walk for dignity for asylum seekers, to say quite clearly that we want to welcome refugees. We want to say quite clearly that treating refugees as the problem is the problem. And we are asking our government and each other, where is the compassion? One of the things that caused me great hope was when Labor said that they were going to turn back the boats as well, that people turned out and really spoke out against that. I said to the students today as I spoke to them, they sing this song at assembly every week or every couple of weeks. And I often wonder what they think. I often wonder whether there's any discussion in their classes about this line, for those who've come across the seas with boundless plains to share. It's a line we sing week after week after week in our schools and in our communities. It's the line that's been taken up by the churches this year for Social Justice Sunday. And in the Social Justice Sunday that has been put out by the churches, they are calling for change, for respectful and informed policy debate, for onshore processing as opposed to offshore processing, for regional cooperation, and for an increase in our humanitarian intake, which has decreased from 20-something thousand to 13-something thousand. People are saying seeking asylum is a human right. Seeking asylum is not about money. They are not economic refugees. People seeking asylum are being put on Manus Island, which is inhumane. People are saying it is not a crime to seek asylum. And so, in a sense, yes, as a nation, we are adrift, but I believe that we're better than this. And I'd like to finish with a short YouTube, if it works, which tells us that, and which many famous Australians emphasise. Very intelligent man.
That you destroy the childhood.
Looking after kids is so important because they grow into adults and that gets passed on. So no, we're not looking after them properly.
We get the habit of cruelty, it will spread. And we're getting the habit of cruelty.
Do we want future citizens of Australia to start their lives like this?
No other country in the world holds children in the way that we do, and the United Nations is very, very concerned about Australia's policies.
I would take every child out of detention. I think there are ways that we can do it. We just have to be imaginative.
I thought that we were better than this.
Take a moment to picture it. Prison wires. do something about it, go to wbttoz.org.
And we are better than this, aren't we?